Hello, welcome to a joint collaboration between the Manchester is Red and Talking City podcasts. We've got Samuel Luckhurst and Simon Bukowski in the studio with me. You can tell it's Derby Day. We've got our red and blue logos. You can tell it's Derby weekend because it is chucking it down outside. A big game, I guess, in Manchester. We had Erik ten Hag's press conference yesterday when it was bluntly put to him that maybe it's not such a big game these days, but for us it is still, of course, a big game. So welcome to my two guests. First of all, we're going to discuss the FA Cup ties, but I guess in Derby spirit, are you two looking ahead to the weekend with excitement, trepidation?
I think you always have to, even though it's clearly not as big a derby as last season. Certainly the second derby last season, and we've probably peaked for modern derbies with an FA Cup final that had such a huge amount riding on it, and then United have fallen away this season and City is still City, so it doesn't feel as big as it has as the two last season, and even maybe the first one, even though United got battered in it, they had a bit of momentum there. So yeah, I think from United perspective it's a little bit similar to Anfield in December, in that I think a lot of people are wondering how many are City going to win by, and Manchester United it didn't go according to plan for Liverpool, but I think repeating that at City on Sunday is probably a near impossible task.
I think it's exciting. I think, as you get closer to the business...
You just don't sound very excited when you said that.
I'm expecting to go to Pep's press conference today and him say, there's 12 games left, this won't define the season, and, I'm sure Ten Hag would or could say the same, but it sort of does. City got Liverpool next week at Anfield, which is their huge game, but that will take on a very different feel depending on if they've won the derby and how well they've won the derby. And similarly, United have were the kind of dark horse for the top four, to the extent that people were kind of expecting them to get it before they messed up so badly against Fulham. And now it's if they lose this weekend and go 11 points behind Aston Villa, suddenly you're talking, is your season over? So this one game won't define the season, but if United fall double figures behind Villa, or if City fall, more than a win behind Liverpool, then it's going to be a lot harder for them in the remaining games to achieve what they want to achieve.
Yeah, and both teams have had FA Cup ties and FA Cup wins this week. United giving up a lot of shots again. I guess the good thing for them going into the derby is that at least Erling Haaland isn't in form.
It was quite sensational to watch at Luton. I tweeted, I really hate giving tens in my player ratings, but you just what can you do? He scored 5 goals.
Can you give 11 tens in the Champions League final?
We don't talk about that. It was really quite something. I mean, Luton played pretty well, and Ted and Mengi played quite well up against Haaland. He was up against him twice in the first 3 minutes, and he did amazing. And it was this is going to be good. But if you keep leaving any defender in the world one-on-one with Erling Haaland, with Kevin De Bruyne knocking balls in behind, they're going to have a nightmare of an evening. And fair play, because Rob Edwards came out after the Luton manager and was that's the way we want to play.
It's great.
And it was painful to do it against City and Haaland and De Bruyne in that form, but that's the way we want to play. We're committed to it. That's what we want to do, and they'll be stronger for having had that. It didn't quite get the headlines that Anish Postecoglou did for his 9-man effort against Chelsea, but it was a similar philosophy. But from a City point of view, De Bruyne and Haaland in form is the dream. And from a United point of view, they've just got to be looking at that and think, we cannot allow Kevin De Bruyne time on the ball, and we cannot allow Erling Haaland to isolate any of our defenders, because he'll be better than them.
Yeah, it was another one of those kind of City performances, and they've both been a bit like that this week. They are still giving up some very good chances to the opposition, aren't they? I mean, Luton scored 2 worldies and missed a lot, 2 or 3 much easier chances, and they are. We spoke a bit about this recently, but they are a very different team to last season, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's still a team with plenty of weaknesses in. I think everyone just looks at 1-0 at Bournemouth, big win, 1-0 against Brentford, and it's no, actually they were really quite difficult games, and games where City didn't have the control that they wanted, and Luton got it back to 3-2 from 3-0, and it wasn't a weak City team, it was a strong side. So, there are still issues, particularly defensively, for the team to solve, and Guardiola's got this sort of Harlem Globetrotters problem of trying to fit in all these amazing attackers into a team while still keeping the balance that isn't just kind of Rodri on his own in 40 metres of space. But it was, you can't argue when you score 6 goals, can you? It was very entertaining, and to be honest, the goals are what have been missing from City because they've not been taking the chances. So we've seen Liverpool rack up big wins, we've seen Arsenal rack up big wins. I know it was the FA Cup, but Premier League team away from home, and you score 6 goals. That is a statement that says, yeah, we would like to win some trophies, please, this season. So
Luton haven't really been thrashed this season like that.
No, exactly. Certainly not at home. And they took the lead against City in the league game.
City never looked like scoring 6 that day, did they?
No. And they looked like scoring 60 the other night. So it was really quite something.
Yeah, just a 1 goal for United at the City ground, but they did somehow not concede, which is a rarity these days. It was a gutsy win, I guess you'd call it. It was
the kind of win that you obviously. They've got to an FA Cup quarter-final. It's an 89th minute winner. Their supporters were right there. Casemiro was in touching distance. That's if you're an away fan, those moments are the moments that you remember most, that you absolutely live for, and it looked absolute carnage in that stand. But we spoke to Andre Nana after the game, and one of the questions was about can you build on this momentum? I'd say I didn't ask that question. I did think, is there any momentum from this kind of win? It's a strange one. That their week is the Forest game is possibly the bigger game this week because there's silverware, the prospect of silverware in the FA Cup. But their week is obviously going to be defined by the derby because it's the Sunday game. It's going to set the agenda for the reports and the follow-ups on Monday. But also it's the comparison. Like City have become everything United used to be. They're the best in class. Yeah, they're the best in class. It's strange how it was because now United are looking at City and they're taking their chief football operations officer to make him their chief executive. They want a stadium that's going to top the Etihad because the Etihad is going to be improved. They want to recruit as well as City, so they're getting in a sporting director who's actually good at recruitment as well. And Ratcliffe has spoken about settling on a new style of play, and when we spoke to him in Knightsbridge last week, he was rhapsodising about City. He even said he wouldn't wish relegation on them over the whole 115 charges that they've still got to answer, and that will come along at some point. But watching United in midweek, they were okay. They weren't poor. They had decent opportunities in the first half. They probably should have scored in the first half, but there was nothing convincing about them. And also they're coming up against a very poor Forest team who've only won 1 Premier League game since they beat United back in December. They kind of got through to the 5th round almost without wanting to, and that they needed extra time against Blackpool in the 3rd round. They needed penalties against Bristol City in the 4th round, and it sounded like Bristol City were the better side at the City ground that evening as well. And Nuno Espirito Santo's teams are a difficult watch. It'll be interesting to see what he does with Forest, whether he can get them anywhere near the level that he got Wolves to, because that Wolves team wasn't his image. This Forest team is definitely not hidden his image, and it feels like they're caught between 2 stools, and that was why it was so galling for United that they lost there in December. But in terms of momentum, they haven't really got any, United, going into this game. Nobody's going to, if they do pull off an away day masterclass and beat City, nobody's going to point back to, it all started at Forest with that game there where hardly anyone really played properly well. With the ratings, I elevate a couple to 8 just because they won really and they kept a clean sheet. But the best players were probably a fullback in Dallo and the goal and Onana, because, as I said, he kept a clean sheet. And they managed to get through in regulation time. But they'll have 9 players out injured at the weekend. That's obviously not an excuse, because it's on Ten Hag and the club for not doing well enough in terms of recruiting to the point where they would have adequate quality and depth in that squad, and they haven't got him. And the other night there was a lad on the bench who probably can't even remember his name now. He came out of the blue. Toby Collier's on the bench for the second game running, and Ten Hag indicated yesterday that it will be pretty much the same squad. And the problem they've got is that they're coming up against a team that have just scored 6 goals, and United, without a striker, all of a sudden again they're struggling for goals. It's not a coincidence, since Højlund got injured, the 2 players who've scored have been the centre-back and a defensive midfielder. And that was the way it was going the first half of the season, when you had Varane popping up with a winner, Maguire got a winner, Lindelof got a winner, Dallow's got a couple of winners as well this season. All those goals came before Højlund went off on his scoring streak. So again, it is a little bit... The mood is a little bit similar approaching the Anfield game in December. Nowhere near as gloomy, because they had won a lot of games before that Fulham match. But yeah, it does feel like the Fulham game was... the regression was stark that day.
Like I say, arguably the biggest thing the win at Forest did, rather than set anything up for the weekend, was at least to ease the pressure on Ten Hag yesterday. We've had this bizarre situation of 3 press conferences in 3 days, and he's been under immense pressure this week. And had they lost at Forest, the focus would have been entirely on his future. How long have you got in the job? And in the end, it's a bit of an easier one for him. The subject becomes Fernandes. United have launched this impassioned, collaborative, defensive Fernandes this week, and the bizarre situation of the club not really wanting to get embroiled in a row with Fulham over their TikTok, and then Ten Hag coming out and demanding an apology from Fulham. And rightly so, I think. If United have got an issue with how Fernandes is being portrayed, then they've got to have an issue with Fulham mocking their captain on social media. But it's been very clear this week that Ten Hag and everyone at the club is very keen to back Fernandes, aren't they, and defend Fernandes this week. And to his credit, we've talked about so many of these players being injured. Fernandes just plays whether he's injured or not. It's not a case of he's not getting injured. It's a case of I'm ignoring that injury. And you wonder if maybe a few other players could take an example from that.
Was it mocking Fernandes? Yeah, the video.
They posted a clip of the injury he got. It was a shin injury, apparently. Right. The injury that he got, and Fulham put, I hope he's okay, eye rolling emoji on their TikTok, which I guess is what TikTok is for. But
so I only saw the footage. Yeah.
No, they posted the hope he's okay, eye rolling emoji.
United made a mountain out of a molehill there. I mean, Fernandes walked past us after the game on Wednesday, and he was limping, but I was in a worse state after the press game last season, and fortunately I wasn't really injured. I was just old. But you still expect him, and Ten Hag essentially said yesterday that he will play in the derby on Sunday. He's still not missed a game through injury. And obviously we saw this, and then we spoke to someone at the club, and they were very impassioned in saying how he had a knock at the weekend, and some of the coverage of it on media, social media, digging out the Daily Mail for their fan reaction was a disgrace, and it created this perception that's inaccurate. He did have a knock, he was a doubt, other players would prioritise recovery, and he wanted to play tonight, he got the assist, what have you, okay. And then, of course, there's another message that comes in on Thursday morning that just essentially says all that, but gives it wider exposure to those who weren't there. That becomes a story. Then it's the press conference, and it becomes another story, because Ten Hag is saying that Fulham should apologise, and it's not right what they've done. With Fernandes, I think the comm staff need a good relationship with the captain. They've clearly got that. And Fernandes does give them the time of day. There was one player who walked into the City ground the other night past one of the press officers and gave the impression that he'd never met him in his entire life, or wouldn't recognise him. But Fernandes does have a close relationship with them. He does, obviously, has to talk to them. I think the captains of Premier League clubs are obliged to speak after pretty much every Premier League game. I think that's a contractual obligation now. So he's doing a lot of that. He's spending a lot of time with the press officers. I suspect there's an element of Fernandes asking them to go into bat for him, but I also think it feels more like that they like Fernandes and they want to stick up for him. But the perception of Fernandes, there's a reason why pretty much every other opposition fans loathe him. I mean, he seems to get booed at most grounds these days away from Old Trafford. And that's because he feigns agony. That's because he's prone to going down. And when he does go down, you do wonder, is he actually injured quite a lot of the time? And the irony of all this is that in this Ineos book, you've got this passage where Sir Jim Ratcliffe is effectively deriding Fernandes for going down under was it Ibrahim Konate in the 7-0 last season, where he barely touched him and he goes down. And there's a passage in the Ineos book, and I don't think Ratcliffe is quoted, but he makes this comparison about how brave rugby players were in some New Zealand game he went to watch, and how it was in stark contrast to Bruno Fernandes milking a challenge.
Not one of them, is he?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think Ineos have got some tie up with the All Blacks. So yeah, there was some All Black shirts framed on the walls in the Ineos office when we went there last week. So yeah, he's partial to a bit of rugby as well, which I know we'll try not to hold against him.
I guess you're right that some of Fernandes' elements on the pitch are unlikable, really, to a degree, but he does it because he cares a lot. Clearly, absolutely despises losing, arguably to an unhealthy degree. I mean, he's been doing this since he was 2 weeks into his United career, and he was in the Solskjaer era. He was just telling players they weren't good enough, basically, weren't they? And I guess that's what you want in a captain. And you compare that to some of the other players, you'd want more of them to be like Fernandes than not, I guess. And maybe one of those is Marcus Rashford, criticised for his body language by Alan Shearer on Wednesday night, and has written in the Players' Tribune this week. Samuel, you read it yesterday.
You read it as well, I bet.
I'm hosting. Give us your thoughts, and bear in mind we're trying to keep this podcast to 45 minutes.
It's very 2018 to do a Players' Tribune, and even when they started doing them, you'd read it and you'd think, if they actually said that, they're very, very strangely ghosted, which means ghost written, in that Marcus Rashford has not sat down and written that. And in fairness, that there's footage of him giving an interview, they've transcribed it and they've presented it in the way that they have. And maybe it's all verbatim, but clearly he feels that's his comfort zone, that he can give that kind of it's a verbal essay, let's face it. It's borderline dissertation. But when I saw it drop, I thought, well, that's interesting timing, given that you've just played badly again. You've got 5 goals this season, and Erling Haaland scored 5 goals in an hour against Luton, and also there's a derby on Sunday. So, and he essentially said, I'm not having a go at the media, but they've created this character, Marcus Rashford, and he suggested that some in the media have got an axe to grind with him because of what he did with free school meals in 2020. I've never got that impression from a single colleague whatsoever.
Certainly on the football journalism side, that is very much not the case. I mean, I would say generally most of us are to the left and politically. So I think most of us, the thing we admire most about Rashford is that sort of campaigning.
As far as I'm aware, any criticism has been over his form or his body language or his finishing, or overplaying it or overdoing it, or not chasing back, or his attitude at times, or going for a night on the tiles in Belfast and then essentially fibbing to United about which night he went out for a night on the tiles in Belfast, and then not being able to play in the weekend game. He's been disciplined twice by Ten Hag this season, over the Belfast incident, and then his birthday party 3 hours after he was cheered off by United supporters in a 3-0 derby defeat to City. The perception of this is, just looking on Twitter, which is obviously not a reliable gauge, but a lot of United fans have no time for it. It's like, oh, he's back in PR mode. I mean, He doesn't work with Kelly Hogarth anymore, but it gives the illusion that he does work with Kelly Hogarth, because of course she did cultivate, or certainly help him with, not creating this image, because the whole free schools meal did come out of a place of sincerity, and of course she's working with Raheem Sterling now as well. But he's not done this for a while, and it's just a really, really strange time to go on the attack when really should be going on the attack on the pitch. And he's, we've all seen the Ross Barkley clip from a couple of weeks ago where Barkley played quite well against United and Rashford's just ambling, trying to chase him back. And these clips are being clipped up quite often. And as I said, you look at his form for United in recent years, and it's hot and cold. Like, he's got as many goals now as he had two seasons ago at this stage, and then he didn't score any more that season. There's a danger of it happening again this season. And also, I've just found it strange when he said, if you question my commitment to Man United and you bring my family into it. His brother met Paris Saint-Germain officials at the start of last season. They played that bargaining chip. He got his contract. Since he got his contract, he's been performing like a drain. The supporters aren't stupid. They see it. And they've been on his back quite a lot this season about it. Like, in a season where a minority of supporters booed him against Chelsea, where he was cheered off in a couple of games, the Brentford one, the City one, where he's had a night on the tiles in Belfast, where he's had a birthday party hours after the derby and had his knuckles rapped by his manager. It's just a really strange thing to do. And it also seems like it's another disaster class by this PR guru who he's joined up with, who just really seems to be the worst in class as far as PR goes. I think there's a reason why Kyle Walker has different representation, and I've spoken to people who know the Rashfords, and even they've said that they don't know why he's taken that decision to seek her expertise, shall we say.
I think the thing I most enjoyed about that answer was the use of the phrase "night on the tiles," which is wonderful for 1990.
Proper newspaper phrase.
Proper newspaper phrase. I might have one myself this weekend now after hearing that.
I've got all these listeners Googling "night on the tiles." What does "night on the tiles" mean?
Quick reaction then to FA Cup quarter-final draws. Simon, City, Newcastle at home.
Well, I've just seen Eddie Howe's reaction. He said he was driving and it nearly caused him to swerve off the road, which was
it's like Ashley Cole. That
yeah,
time, isn't it?
lovely throwback to Ashley Cole.
We've probably famously got a Newcastle fan in the office who often hosts the Manchester is Red podcast. I'm sure he's not shy in talking about it, and he was at Ewood the other night, and he messaged me and said all that effort to get City away and lose in the next round.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a given that they'll go through, but they will be favourites to go through, and a home game is kind of extra advantage because going to St James's is difficult. They very nearly lost, probably should have lost when they went up in January, only for De Bruyne to come to the rescues. And Newcastle are sort of regressing a bit, and because it's soon as well, it's middle of March, isn't it? So yeah, I mean, City are in that mode now where they can start to smell the silverware, and to be able to say by the middle of March, yeah, we booked another trip to Wembley, they will very much be focusing on that as much as the league. So yeah, they'll be very happy.
I think we're in the territory now where you can safely ask him about the treble today. So
we asked Kevin De Bruyne after the Luton game, and you could see he visibly winced as he was asked. And nobody likes talking about it. They don't like talking about it. But I mean, what Kevin did say, which was sort of quite on the money, was that it's great for them because they can't do anything about it. They don't kind of need to big up the treble or anything like that. They just need to keep winning games, and as long as they're in that position, then it's inevitable. And I don't think they've had, certainly the last few weeks, all the excitement has been about kind of Arsenal and Liverpool in form for the Premier League. But with City, it's not the Premier League. It's always the treble, because they just have this kind of FA Cup and Champions League sort of campaign on the side. And a bit like you were saying with United's week will be framed by the derby. Well, City's probably will be, but on Wednesday they play Copenhagen, so they can move on quickly and be like, yeah, we're in the Champions League last 8, thanks very much. Whereas United having gone out is less for that. And the same with Newcastle having gone out of Europe and struggling in the league. The FA Cup is it for them, for their kind of hopes of glory, and they're going to have to beat the world champions to do it.
And Samuel, tie the round is going to be at Old Trafford.
It is. Well, I looked it up out of interest. I don't think United and Liverpool have ever drawn each other in the quarterfinals, and obviously that's you get a quarterfinal, semi-final. It was yesteryear. It would be a big trip to Villa Park or Highbury or Goodison or Main Road, going back a long, long time. And there's a rich history between those clubs in the FA Cup alone, never mind the rivalry itself, and it will stir a lot of memories. I think they played each other in the Cup a few years ago, but it was a COVID game in the fourth round when United won 4-2. But that's going to be a hell of an occasion. Everyone knows it's going to be on a Sunday as well, because Liverpool have got Europa League in midweek, so I can imagine that's going to be a hell of an atmosphere. There'll be a huge Liverpool following. Trying to think the last time, it might have been 2011, the last time fans were present for an FA Cup tie between them at Old Trafford, third round game. I think it was the Ryan Babel, Howard Webb in a Man United shirt post when Steven Gerrard got sent off. So they're not always brilliant games. United Liverpool, as we've always said, there's so much hype that goes into the Premier League games in particular, and more often than not they do underwhelm, even though there've been a couple of rather striking results in recent years. But that game has to be decided on the day as well, as FA Cup games do, from the fifth round and beyond. And from our perspective, it's going into international week as well. If United were to lose that, it pretty much kills their season, because I think there's every chance that come that game, they'll have had 2 Premier League games against City and Everton at home. They're going to be a long, long way off top 4 going into the March internationals. So that FA Cup game, it's huge anyway. But it's we said the other night, it's the biggest game of the season. But the biggest game of the season comes pretty much every other day or every week in United's case.
That's all for the first part of the Manchester is Red / Talking City podcast. We'll be back after the break to talk about the derby. Welcome back to the... I'm just going to call it a podcast now. I can't think of a decent title for it. Welcome back to the podcast. This is the derby section. On my notes, it's got Simon and Samuel back and forth. So I'm going to make a brew maybe while you two just thrash it out, and I'll come back and see a few bloody noses and who's throwing the best haymakers.
I'll start with a mischief. Is it Ten Hag's last derby?
Maybe the FA Cup
semi-final. I would imagine it's probably his last league derby. Yeah, I think there's going to be a managerial change at some point this year. United can still have, weirdly, they can still technically have a successful season if they win the FA Cup and finish in the top 4. Weirdly, it would trump last season, just because the FA Cup is a more cherishable trophy than the League Cup. But in terms of performance level and consistency and momentum, last season is always going to trump this season already anyway. It's a strange position they're in. And as I said the other day, I think it was Rich Jolly who said in the press room on Saturday, and this was before the Fulham defeat, he said that you've got Ineos coming in, they've got a new chief exec, new sporting director coming in, making all these departmental changes, want to change recruitment, want to change scouting. It's almost illogical to retain the same manager. And that Ratcliffe is, by declining to assess Ten Hag, that was telling as well. And watching Ten Hag at Forest in midweek, he looked very, very agitated. I've never seen him look that agitated or vexed. He got a talking to from the referee in the first half, and he got a touchline ban earlier in the season without anyone really knowing about it. Like, I don't know why it's only 3 yellow cards and they're in the stands. Why it's not the final? Nobody knows. It's almost like the Harry Maguire suspension in the League Cup semi-final last season, because he wasn't playing with United and nobody really cared. So watching him in midweek, it was quite telling how there was so much riding on that game, and he knew it. And as you said, he'll have got some brief respite. It was a strange decision to have 3 press conferences in as many days, and with that as well, that press conference time was only confirmed about, what was it, nearly 11 o'clock at night on the Wednesday.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a piece this morning on the 3 press conferences in 3 days and kind of what he's been like, and did mischievously put in there that they confirmed the 2 p.m. time just after the final whistle at Forest. And
15 hours later.
Yeah, had it gone wrong, maybe it would have been at 2 a.m. rather than 2 p.m, given the pressure he's under. But he's been pretty combative and angry and defensive a bit this week, hasn't he? He's been feisty.
Yeah, it was a good question from Mickey Gray about Anthony, and he said, because he was asked about Amari Forson coming in, he said, "Oh yeah, people were wondering what was I doing bringing Kobe Mainoo in," and then they're saying, "Oh, he's got to be in the England squad." And when Garnacho came in, it's like, "Oh, what's he doing?" Like, nobody said that. If anything, people were saying, "Why aren't you bringing Kobe Mainoo in back sooner?" Because there's a player who can master your style of play and is there for the long term, and he was looking really good in pre-season. I don't think anybody took umbrage with Garnacho coming in. His first start for United last season was against FC Sheriff in the Europa League. Nobody thought that and thought, what's he doing playing him against this team from Moldova, who Tyrone Marshall has very fond memories of visiting in Chisinau. Yeah. So that was weird. And when he says things like that, and when he bites back at Jamie Carragher, the pressure is starting to take its toll. And that's understandable, because it has been, there has been a hell of a lot of scrutiny on his position this season. There is a lot of uncertainty around his position. That's an established fact. There are players in that dressing room who, frankly, would rather have a different manager in the dugout and to train under every week. Not necessarily the majority, but certainly some very established players at United. And if they don't get Champions League qualification next season, and let's face it, you look at his Champions League record, and United underestimated this when they gave the background and appointed him, and they said, "Oh, he got to the Champions League semi-final, great." He also crashed out the group stage twice with Ajax, and in his final season they went out to Benfica in the last 16 when they were widely expected to get past them. So he's had five Champions League campaigns. His teams have gone out the group stage in three of them. The one anomalous campaign was when Ajax were a Lucas Moura kick away from getting to the final. So you want a manager who, when he takes your team into the Champions League, there's a sense of belief that you're going to do something in the competition, not just be in it and risk going out of the group stage. Because that happened under Solskjaer, it happened under Van Gaal as well. They went out with a whimper under Mourinho to Sevilla. So look, if you're Sir Dave Brailsford and or Sir Jim Ratcliffe and you're doing this audit on United, I mean, Gary Neville alluded to it in the week that he thought that they had an idea already, and maybe it's just the politics that's delaying it, and it's a question of timing. And look, history tells us that if you're a Manchester United manager and you don't get Champions League qualification, you're toast. Van Gaal and Moyes were sacked after they failed. Mourinho and Solskjaer were sacked in seasons that they didn't finish in the top four.
Who's it a bigger game for, Si? I mean, it feels like if City lose, you'd still think they've got a pretty good chance of winning the title. United are so far adrift in that top four race now that they can't really afford to slip up, but then nobody really expects them to take any points. And I guess you've got the shock factor, haven't you? Where if City even fail to win, it is going to be a surprise, isn't it? Yeah,
I saw Pochettino complaining this week about how when City and Liverpool lose, believes the sort of media reaction is like, so what? Whereas when Chelsea lose, it's a big deal. Of which the two things are like, well, you lose every week, so that's why it's a big deal. Yeah. But also, you've had a really easy ride in the media, considering you've spent $1 billion and not done very well. That Gary Neville quote. It's so like I say, City can move on even if they lose the derby, whereas United will sort of be stuck with it for the week. But it feels like City have something to prove and need a big performance and a big win at home against a good team, because they've not really had that for a long time. You think back to last season when they were just kind of unstoppable at home, and they put 4 past Liverpool, they put 4 past Arsenal, they put 3 past Bayern, they put 4 past Real Madrid. Like, everyone came and everyone was, went home embarrassed pretty much. They've not had that at all this season. Drew with Liverpool, drew with Chelsea, drew with Spurs, showed kind of vulnerability in all of those games. And of course they lost to Villa away, so they've not done that well against the top teams at all. United, I know United haven't been at the top this season, but they're always a big game with it being the derby. So, the Luton game was a bit of a statement for City, but this would really be a test of, are City strong enough to win the league, especially ahead of the trip to Anfield? Because I think if they don't beat United, then the natural consequence will be, talking about their record against top teams, their record at the Etihad, which isn't as good as it has been or should be. And whether they have kind of that edge against an Arsenal team and a Liverpool team in form, whereas, if they win, then we sort of mention the word ominous for the 1,000th time. And
what's the bigger game for City next week, and which one would they rather win out of United and Liverpool?
Liverpool every day of the week. Like their record at Anfield is so terrible. And
is it still the Anelka game, which was last, where they won with fans present?
Yes, yeah. Liverpool are their direct rival for the league. United have never really threatened them under Guardiola's time, so he's not kind of known United as a rival. City are kind of seen as the best hope to derail the Jurgen Klopp farewell party that is starting to take shape. So I think City beating Liverpool at Anfield would be a much bigger message for the rest of the league than beating United at home would, because people expect them to beat United at home, and as much as if they didn't beat United at home, it would be seen as a surprise, but it would be a bigger surprise almost for City to win at Anfield, just because the record is so bad.
United should have been wincing through every word of that answer, really, feeling it.
Yes. I mean, it's interesting that I think this is the third time in the last 4 years. It can't just be a fixture computer quirk. The clubs have played each other in the first weekend of March. And when United rocked up at City in the COVID season in 2021, City had been on this long winning run. United had, I think, 3 0-0s on the spin. And it was almost that cliched derby day. The form book did go out the window, and United did a job on City. They played really well, but it was fake football with no crowd present. And then, of course, normality resumes the following season. United will very, very quickly rumbled, especially away from home. It seemed like the players were clearly unnerved by supporters being back in the stadium, which is really odd given that that's what they've been used to for most of their lives. And Solskjaer even said earlier in the season, his interview with Andy Mitten, it seemed, the players did seem to play better when it was COVID. I think, it's a massive ringing endorsement of your tenure there. And City have put 10 goals past United in their last 2 home games against them. So that's why there is definitely a sense that this is a dreaded derby for United fans now, especially going to the Etihad. And the City have been so dominant against them at home in those last 2 games. It does give the illusion that it's been this way for a long, long time. But the 2 games before that, United actually won at the Etihad under Solskjaer, and that's why his acolytes look back at those games with real fondness. I think the season where City didn't win the league against Liverpool, and they'd had a couple of defeats before then, United in the first half in particular on the counter-attack with the halcyon days of Rashford, Marshall and Daniel James, probably should have been further ahead than 2-0 at half-time, but City clearly were not right that season, and it showed in that that the Liverpool pretty much steamrolled to the title, and City were a distant second that time, and then they were back with a vengeance the following campaign. So it is, I think, what must be galling in particular for United fans is that, and it was misleading at the time, when they beat City last season in January at Old Trafford, they were within touching distance of them. They were like a point or 2 behind them after that game, and some started to say, they're in a title race now, and I didn't buy that. And then the following week it was a late draw at Crystal Palace and defeat at Arsenal, and that did kibosh the prospect of them putting up a fight for the title. And I know that win was somewhat controversial last season because the equalising goal was, in essence, it was offside, but the way offside is interpreted now, they decided to allow it. City were enraged by that, and then United went in for the kill and scored quite quickly afterwards. But by and large that day, I thought United were probably the better side. Certainly in the first half, they were very good, and there was an element of luck about it. But you thought that day, well, maybe is this the turning point in this rivalry? And it turned out to be a false stall. And that's been the problem with this United side. When they have had particularly big moments under Ten Hag, they've not backed it up. When they won the League Cup last season, a week later, they're walking off the pitch at Anfield and looking at the scoreboard, and it said Liverpool 7, United 0. And there's definitely been a gradual decline since they won the League Cup in terms of their form, the performance level, and of course the results and other things going on in the background as well. So it's a shame for us at the MEN that you prefer it to be like between 2011 to 2013, when it was City first, United second. Next season it was United first, City second. When they were, City were the last. That was the last great challenge Ferguson had. It was to topple City after they dared to take the title off United in very United fashion. That time with the stoppage time goal against Queen's Park Rangers. But look, since Ferguson headed upstairs, City finished above United in every season, and I'd probably say only the 2014-15 season should United have finished above City, or they had a chance to finish above City when they battered them 4-2 at Old Trafford. But then again, that was a big win for them, and then they only won, I think, one of their last 6 league games, and City ended up finishing above them again.
I mean, United's best chance of finishing above City in the near future is probably City being in League One.
Yes, yeah.
That's all for part 2 of the podcast. We'll be back after the break to look ahead in more detail to Sunday's game. Welcome back to the Manchester Evening News' Derby Preview podcast. Let's start with team news in this section. Then we've had Erik ten Hag's press conference, and he confirmed that it'll essentially be the same kind of hodgepodge squad, I guess, that was at Forest. Samuel, would you expect the same team? Would you expect any changes? He's not really got a lot of options, has he?
I imagine Mainu has to come in, and he clearly will have taken him out of the team in the midweek with an eye on the derby, without trying to compromise United's strength. And I suppose that was another reason why it was quite a big win in midweek, because the previous game at Forest was known as the Kobbie Mainu game, because he made the daft decision to take him off at half-time at 0-0, and then Forest scored 2 goals where there was just a void in midfield there. So I imagine it will be Mainu to come in with Casemiro, of course. And then the question is, which one do you keep? Do you keep McTominay? It does feel, as Solskjaer as this feels like, as this sounds, it does feel like a game that you've got to probably have McTominay in there in some position. I don't know where.
Play Fernandes on the right?
I think that might be the case, because that happened twice last season at Old Trafford when they beat City, and then in the cup final at Wembley. And look, the striker probably is Rashford again, even though he's just playing there. I mean, he's starting by default anyway, because his form has been that poor. The timing of his goal against Wolves was absolutely ideal after the Belfast trip, but he's not kicked on from there. He's not scored since then, and he's not actually played well either. There's not been a game that you've come away from and you thought that Rashford's really played well today. And look, Anthony, I think he started at the Etihad last season, but he got dug out by Paul Scholes afterwards. I think it was Anthony and Sancho who were the wingers, and Scholes put that post up about, I remember a time when fullbacks were protected by their wingers. It was a picture of Beckham and Giggs, and I think it's probably just as well that Tyrone Marshall can't play in this game, because he had probably a worse derby debut than Patrice Evra did that time up against Phil Foden last season. But watching Amrabat in a defensive capacity in the week, you think, my God, him at left back. He did switch to right back. I don't think he'll be venturing into midfield quite as much as he did at Forest. But that is like, the positioning there is a big call on what Ten Hag does with it, because it's not great either way if you've got possibly Jeremy Doku up against Amrabat as a right back, and you're having to move Dalot to left back when he's a right back. But as I said in the week, they are in as the film Argo says, this is the best bad idea we have, and that's what they're having to cobble together. But again, I don't think you can just pin it on the injuries, as Ten Hag has kind of tried to do. He said it's not an excuse, whilst mentioning them quite often, to try and give try and arouse sympathy there, because the quality in the squad depth it's not good enough, and it is unfortunate that both left backs are injured at the same time again. But he did sign Tyrone Marshall, and he did decide, as poor as he was, he did decide to terminate Sergio Reguilón's loan early in January, which was clearly a bit too hasty.
Si, you're going to Pep Guardiola's press conference shortly, so we don't know the team news yet. Do get on the Manchester News website later, listeners, to see Si's take from Guardiola, but presuming there's no surprises in the injury?
Yeah, I don't think Jack Grealish will be making it, which is the big news for City, because he has, but they play better when he plays, and they win a lot more games when he plays. He started at Copenhagen earlier this month for the first time in over a month, and the first 20 minutes was probably the best 20 minutes they've had in a game this season. And then he was forced off with a groin injury, and then he comes back, and their first, 40 minutes at Luton were pretty terrific, and then he's forced off with a groin injury. And City are less good. Copenhagen, they surrendered control, they conceded an equaliser, and they had to sort of fight to regain control of that match. Luton, he went off, they were breezing, and then, it went from 3-0 to 3-2. So, considering as well how good he was when him and Bernardo Silva just took United apart in the derby earlier in the season, it was really on City's left, United right, where City just rampaged through. And
Bernardo just drifted over, didn't he?
It was Lindelof at left back, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was sort of no... It was just clearly a case of Guardiola spotting something and the players executing it, and United having no answer. So it will be interesting to see how City replace Grealish, because I feel like he would have been starting. But then you obviously have Rodri and Kevin De Bruyne. Rodri and Phil Foden will come back into the team from midweek, and Foden may well be the one who, he loves to play centrally, but they might say go out on the wing, or they might put Bernardo Silva out on the wing and have sort of Silva and Foden dovetailing in the way that Bernardo and Grealish did. So Grealish is a blow, and Guardiola won't be there either probably, but there is still a lot of talent to be slotted into that team. You're probably looking at no room for Doku. Doku's not done enough with recent chances, and maybe also no room for Julian Alvarez, who's been very good.
Doku was quite poor against Chelsea, I thought, when watching the other one.
Yeah, he's in a similar way that kind of Grealish just kind of makes the team play better. The team just look a bit more chaotic, and not in a good way with Doku. And similarly, Núñez, who's still kind of finding his feet. He still has looks like a deer on ice at times. You just don't know. I think the thing is with Doku, you don't know where his next touch is going to take him, and it often looks like he doesn't know where his next touch is going to take him. So you would take kind of the more experienced players and the players who are better at control. Every time Guardiola spoke at Bournemouth after they won 1-0, and he was like, this was the game where we needed every player to take 2 or 3 touches, and that's why you need Bernardo Silva and John Stones and those players. And I think City will adopt a similar approach for this game.
Well, I was really surprised he brought Doku on at Bournemouth at 1-0 at a point when Bournemouth were playing so well. I thought it was a very un-Pep move, and there was the incident, I think it was in the last minute, when Doku tried to beat his man and lost the ball, and Bernardo had to commit the tactical foul in the centre circle and get a booking. And it's just that's very un-City under Pep. Yeah,
and even at Luton, because he came on for Grealish in the first half, and then at the end of the game, everyone's celebrating, and Guardiola's over to Doku to be like, right, we're having a 1-to-1 on the pitch because you need another lesson, mate, in his way that he does. So I would be surprised if Doku started the derby, because I think City have enough kind of sharper weapons to to get in behind United.
So we kind of know how City are going to play. What do we think with United? Because it kind of feels like part of the problem this year is that Ten Hag has just been so wedded to this way of playing, this, as Carragher called it, this low block and high press, and committing so many men forward, so many midfielders, so often two midfielders getting caught ahead of the ball, that you see that regular sight that Carragher again mentioned of like 5, 6, 7 red shirts sprinting to get back. Forest again had 16 shots, I think. That's 8 games in a row where the opposition have had at least 15 shots against United. They cannot be that open at the Etihad and even get close to getting a result in this game, can they?
No, one of the problems they had at Wembley last season, apart from conceding after about 10 seconds, was you kind of knew how they were going to line up because Marshall was unavailable, Anthony was unavailable, and also Fernandes had played on the right Old Trafford. But one of the biggest problems in terms of their tactics, their setup that day, was Eriksen as the 10, because he was anonymous in the Old Trafford derby, in that it's one of those games that if he's there, it just passes him by. Like he shows his age, and he's obviously not going to start. But that 10 role on Sunday, as you said, I think it probably will be occupied by McTominay, because if he's not got the ball, and let's face it, he's not going to have a lot of the ball anyway with coming up against City, he will be in a position to muck in, supplement the midfield, and try and ensure that Casemiro is not overexposed, which has happened pretty much every week recently, apart from maybe the Forest game midweek. It didn't feel like Forest really preyed on him that much there. And obviously Amrabat came into midfield at times, but that was mainly when United had the ball. It wasn't having an extra body in there against Forest's counter-attacks. It might have been the first time in a long time, it felt like, certainly, that United had more of the ball than a team. And of course you're doing it against a Nuno Espirito Santo team, so it's not like it's anything to write home about. With the game of the weekend, as I said, I think McTominay is going to have to occupy that role. Even though it's an attacking position, he's occupying it possibly more for the defensive side. In the, I know we at times we've watched McTominay and it's looked like he's caught between two stools. Is he a defensive player? Is he an attacking player? I think that's clearer now. But he is robust. He's a good athlete. He is going to chase back. If you want to play on the whole, he's an academy graduate as well. He knows what the derby means and he's got experience of playing those games. Then fine, like he can bring that into it as well. And as Si said, where they've got the De Bruyne Haaland collaboration back together again and back in full flow, they can't afford to give De Bruyne time on the ball. He probably didn't have that much time on the ball when he did it last season, but that cross he played for, was it Haaland's second goal, was probably one of the best crosses I've ever seen live. And the finish was exceptional as well, because he was on the slide. I think Varane had just got injured and it was almost if they, just like that, they could toy with the defender who wasn't at his maximum, and there's the ball that's arched round him. And even if he was fully fit, I'm not sure he'd have been able to have done too much about it. It was just an exceptional piece of attacking play. A concern they have defensively is that there is not a lot of speed there. Varane is not particularly quick, and there were times watching Varane that you feel like he's almost running not at full tilt because he knows that he's going to break down. And that's probably a growing issue as well, because we've said time and again he can't play 2 games in a week. He played the full game in midweek. I think was it the week of the Wolves and West Ham games. He played against Wolves. He didn't start against West Ham.
And Johnny Evans started ahead of him Old Trafford in the derbies.
That went well. That is one to watch out for, because he's probably on the brink in terms of his bristleness and how far he can push it. And look, if he's out for the Everton game next week, then you've got to take that hit really, because that might be one of the few games that United control. But as I said, there's not a lot of pace to counter City, and that's why, like, obviously you said that Doku probably won't start. He's going to be quite a handy player to bring on if City do need to bring on, and they're not outside there. And United don't have that depth on. They're not going to have a deep bench to draw from. I mean, it said it all that Ahmad was summoned the other night for his first game since he came on against Forest 2 months earlier.
Right, it says here to finish predictions, but I guess an easier way to do it is, to start with, does anyone think Manchester United are going to win?
No.
Does anybody think Manchester City won't win?
No.
Okay. Bye-bye to our Manchester United listeners. Any takers on how many goals City might score? Do we think it's going to be close. Ten Hag said in his press conference yesterday that it was close at Wembley, which on the score sheet I guess it was. He also said it was close. He said we kept it close at Old Trafford last year. Well, very close. You won. Yes. So, it might have been a surprise, but you did win. Will they keep it close on? Does anyone think Manchester United will keep it close on Sunday?
No, I don't think so. What's their heaviest defeat this season been? United's. That's the one thing I'm thinking of. Like, I don't think they've had a true.
Would it be 3-0?
Yeah, probably is. Like Newcastle and those games were
Brighton 3-0.
Yeah, 3-1 that was.
Almost 4-3-0.
Bournemouth, yeah. So 3-0s at home. So yeah, there's an omen. They've not been thrashed away from home yet.
Yeah. So we're saying the target is to keep.
Yeah. If you push me for a prediction, I'd probably say City winning 3-0.
I'd go for 4-1.
Okay.
I think they'll concede.
In that territory as well. Thank you for listening to this special Derby preview podcast. If you liked it, please do leave a 5-star review and remember to like and subscribe. This will be on both the Manchester is Red and the Talking City feeds, so subscribe to whichever one you want. I can't imagine there's many listeners out there subscribe to both, but if if you're just a passionate fan of Manchester football and you go to the Etihad one week and Old Trafford the next, then yeah, get on both. That'll keep you busy over the weekend. That's all for now. We'll be back separately on Monday to dissect the derby, the good, the bad and the ugly for whichever team produces the ugly. So we'll see what Manchester is Red for that. But that's all for now, and enjoy the weekend, enjoy the derby, and we'll see you all on Monday.